Hello. We ended our last talk from the letter of James in the New Testament listening to what he had to say about helping folk who are in distress. There is in the Bible a very close association between faith, trust in God, and actions, sometimes called works or deeds. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, argues that Abraham, whom James calls the friend of God, chapter 2, verse 23, was brought into a right relationship with God, justified is the word Paul uses, by his trust in God. He writes, Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness, Romans 4:3. In other words, Abraham's broken relationship with God was put right by his trust in God's goodness and forgiveness. James, in this letter, goes on to point out that the faith which put Abraham right with God led Abraham to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice to God. God was testing Abraham and would not let him sacrifice his son to him, but what Abraham was ready to do showed that his faith in God was real. We will probably not be tested in such a severe way as Abraham was, but time and time again we shall be asked to show that our faith really does make a difference to the way we live and act. We become Christians by repenting of our sins, turning round away from them, and going God's way. That is the way of being put right with God by faith. But then our faith is completed and made real by the good things we do for God and for others. James puts it this way, as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. At the time of the Reformation in Europe in the 16th century, a great conflict arose on this issue of faith and works. Many people were trusting that doing religious things like going on pilgrimages, saying a lot of prayers, or giving money to the poor would make them who did them acceptable to God. Martin Luther, the great German reformer, and many others throughout Europe said, no, you can't buy your way to heaven by money or going through a series of religious rituals. God is a gracious, loving God who wants your trust and love. He himself will put us right because of what Jesus, his Son, did in dying for the sins of the whole world. The Reformers showed that our trust must be in God alone, not in ourselves or the things we do, but that a real faith in God will result in our doing good deeds. Jesus put it like this, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. Matthew 5:16. It is important that we understand what the Bible means by real faith. James says, be careful. Don't think that just because you say you believe in God, that all is well. Even the evil spirits believe there is one God. Chapter 2, verse 19. Real faith is a loving trust in God that results in a changed life. Throughout James' letter, we see faith and works, deeds and actions, working together to produce Christian character. When your faith is tested and you don't give way under the testing, then this leads to perseverance. Now, this is a fine quality for living for Christ in the world. If we have no perseverance, that is, if we easily give in when things go wrong in our lives, then we cannot make progress as Christians because life is often full of unpleasant experiences. And it's only when our faith is tested that perseverance can develop. As long as all is going well in our lives, we may not have deep faith in God. But when hard times come, then it's possible for our faith to grow. If we begin to say, how can God let this happen to me? then we begin to lose faith in God as our Father, and our character becomes weakened. In chapter 5, verse 11, James gives us the example of someone who persevered in his faith, even though he had many trials. We read of this man, Job, in the Old Testament. He was a wealthy farmer who lost everything in a series of disasters. He lost all of his many possessions, all his children, and finally his own health. He was tempted to turn away from God and couldn't understand why all these things had happened to him, especially as he had always tried to be faithful to God. Yet he persevered in trusting God in his troubles, even when his own wife turned her back on him. Yet he persevered in trusting God in his troubles, even when his own wife turned her back on God. Job continued to go on trusting and was wonderfully rewarded in the end. Some time ago now, I was asked by my sister-in-law to go with her to see a lady who was ill. She lived in a little house in a back street in Belfast in a downstairs room. She was then quite elderly, but many years before, as a young woman, she had somehow got tuberculosis. In those days, there was not a lot that could be done for that illness, so she was confined to her bed for the rest of her life. When we entered her little room, she was lying in bed with bandages round her face. The doctor had just visited her and bandaged her sores, as he had to do each week. I expected to be depressed by my visit to her, but I came away deeply sorry for her suffering, but lifted up by the radiance of her faith. She did not at all seem sorry for herself, but praised God and urged all people who visited her to follow the Lord. I believe that many folk, especially young people, went away from that back street in Belfast challenged to live their lives for God and his kingdom. You see, she had a faith that worked. She had learned that faith and works work together to produce a perseverance that brings honour to God, inspires other people, and brings good out of an otherwise bad situation. James says in chapter 2, verse 18, "Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by what I do." And we can add, thinking of the old lady, "I will show you my faith by what I am." Here are 3 thoughts from James' letter about real faith. Real faith is made complete by what we do, chapter 2, verse 22. Faith without deeds is useless, chapter 2, verse 20. And Abraham, who trusted God and obeyed God, is called God's friend, chapter 2, verse 23.